Okay, so this is the redo of the ill-fated Module 1 of the initial incomparable applicant masterclass lecture that Pearl and I did, and we had some audio issues on Module 1, but the other modules and lectures managed to record okay. So this was delivered live initially, so now I'm going back and redoing it for posterity. And I'm working off of an outline which you should have stored in your site right here where you're watching this under downloads. This is presentation one on college admissions, starting off with 60/40. What are Ivy League and highly competitive colleges looking for? What the heck do I mean by 60/40? Let's go. So 60/40 really means that, and this doesn't come from me, this comes from my business partner, whose name is Don Betterton. He was on the admissions committee of Princeton University for 30 years, the whole committee, not just an admissions officer. He was also director of financial aid. He makes the software that we use, which is sort of like Naviance on steroids, that some of you at Masterclass customers have access to. And what his best guess is, and I think it's been borne out by my own experiences, is that 60% of the equation, 60, is based on three things: GPA, rigor, as we say up in Boston, and test scores. Those are the big three that admissions officers would prefer to see. So let me make a few comments. GPA kind of speaks for itself, except the dirty little secret about GPA in high schools across the country is that there is massive grade inflation. I personally can't recall the last time that I met someone with a C average. Today's 84 is yesterday's C. So many admissions officers look at GPA with a little skepticism. Some high schools are known for padding GPAs more than others. Some high schools, of course, are known for being pretty rigorous. What you should know about your high school, if you attend a private high school, you might be wondering, is it really viewed better compared to public high schools? Was it worth signing my kid up and paying tuition and taking him out of public school and all that? Every high school, whether public or private, publishes its own profile that guidance counselors will send up with their letter of recommendation and the teacher recommendations. And furthermore, most college admissions officers assigned to your area, wherever you live, will be familiar with your high school because that's their job to get to know the high schools in their territories. So to answer the question whether they understand how hard or how easy a high school is, or whether an AP honors or regular A in class is different at one high school versus another, they pretty much do. So that being said, GPA is important, but there is a huge amount of grade inflation. Now, the second component of that 60% rigor is often overlooked by guidance counselors. So I meet with a ton of students year in, year out, and this time of year, I'm recording this in the middle of May. By now, most of our clients have chosen their schedules for next year, or at least their, I guess, conditional schedules, because you can still make changes once school starts. You have most schools give you a 2 to 4 week free look type of period. And one of the things that comes up frequently is whether it's worth taking the extra AP class or not. And typically, the guidance counselor is recommending against taking the extra AP class, usually because they don't think the kid is up for it, or they don't want the kid to get too stressed out, which I understand because guidance counselors spend a lot of time on mental health and anxiety and all that. However, that's not always the best advice. That one size fits all, don't take the extra AP advice, which from my end, I kind of do see as one size fits all. I don't like it particularly. So I have a client this year, his name is Ben, who attends a fairly prestigious parochial private high school here in Long Island. and he was recommended not to take an AP in science and an AP, I think in math. I think he was recommended for honors calc, not calc AB. And his parents were asking me, is that okay? And I said, well, it depends. And it depends on what colleges Ben wants to be competitive at, wants to have a shot at getting into. So I asked Ben that, and he listed a few pretty selective colleges in his responses. So I said, look, what that means is you really need to push yourself to take those extra AP classes because the kids you're competing against will have taken at least as many total APs over your high school career. So I don't want you to be fighting, with one hand tied behind your back, trying to be competitive at these colleges when your competition looks better on paper. So that's how I answer whether you should take the extra AP question or not. And and I want you also to understand when you're finalizing a college list and you're looking at various colleges, because I don't know what year your son or daughter is in, whether it's freshman, sophomore, junior year, etc. Take the extra AP class if you're competing for that. Your daughter or son is competing at that high echelon because your competition is. There's a couple high schools around here that let kids take 17 or 18 APs, which is pretty much excessive. I think the max is generally somewhere around 12 to 14 at a competitive high school district. And then if you attend a high school that doesn't offer as many AP classes, circling back to what I was saying before about the admissions officers recruiting territorially, they will know that. You won't be penalized for that. But if you attend a high school that's fortunate enough to offer a ton of AP classes, but you don't take them all, you don't avail yourself of a certain amount, then that could possibly look worse if your gross total of 8 AP classes out of 14 compares to someone who attended a different high school with a gross total of 8, and that's the max that she could have taken as well. All right, moving on to test scores. There's been a slow pullback from colleges in terms of allowing their kids to submit applications without revealing their SAT or ACT. So one of the questions I get a lot is, well, if I don't submit my scores, won't they know? And my answer is, yeah, of course. These colleges don't think that your score was too high, so you didn't want to show off, right? Um, so uh, more importantly, I just want to point out there's a difference between applying test optional and getting in test optional. Those are two totally different things. Colleges in a vacuum would rather see test scores than not because admissions officers have a hard time trying to ascertain whether kids can actually succeed academically at that school because of the aforementioned massive grade inflation rampant throughout the country. And that's why schools, not just Ivy League schools, but schools like University of Miami, which somewhat recently announced that they were no longer test optional. That's why they are requiring scores. But again, that's one component out of, well, it's really 25 factors. But the three that I'm talking about right now are in the aggregate, that's 60%, which is grades, rigor, and SAT or ACT score. So my rule of thumb is if you're in that median, right in the middle or higher, I would submit. But if you're below that median, meaning even if you're in the range, the 25 to 75% range, I'd be hesitant to submit. I had a client 4 years ago, and he was told by his school counselor at his private high school to submit his ACTs. So his mom asked me, "Do you think Dylan should do that?" And I said, well, let me look again at the totality of his application because I think I knew the answer, but I wanted just to double check that. So I looked at his GPA, his rigor, and his pretty amazing extracurricular activities, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. But in a nutshell, they were pretty atypical, not the typical things. His activities were things that showed a lot of impact that he made. So my response to Dylan and his mom, Melinda, was okay, he's below the median. I don't want to give the admissions officers a reason to deny. So in other words, I was playing defense. Everything else about his application was superior, relative to his competition, but his scores were not. So there was about 15 seconds of discussion back and forth when finally Melinda said, "Okay, well, this is why we hired you. We're going to take your advice and let's hope it works out." And of course, I got a little pit in my stomach, but luckily it did work out because he was a great candidate and he gets in early decision and he got $33,000 a year of merit aid. So it really turned out in retrospect to be the right decision. And look, it's never just one thing that admits or denies a kid. I don't know if he would have gotten in had he submitted his sub median SAT scores, but that's just how I played that one. So that's my best advice to you on scores. Okay. So so now we've covered the 60%. I'm moving right along here. 40% of the admissions decision is a combination of factors that are out of your control as well as ones that are in your control. So the stuff that's out of your control, and these are not always politically correct things that come out of my mouth, but I'm just giving you the facts as I see them. I'm the Joe Friday of college advisors, just the facts. Who knows if any of you get that reference? Um, Race, ethnicity, your zip code, whether your parents have jobs or whether they went to college, if they went to college, things like that. Those are part of those out of your control factors. Here's one that always gets overlooked by guidance counselors: what high school you go to, because some high schools are feeder high schools for certain colleges and some are not. My youngest, she's about to enter her junior year of Cornell University, which means I have only 2 more years of tuition. But this is not about me. That's just expressing unbridled joy. She 2 years ago, there was an email that went around from Cornell with the shocking revelation that they had done a study, and that study had revealed that 80% of their students that enrolled were from feeder high schools, which for Cornell is typically a lot of private, prep schools from around the country, but certainly in the Northeast, Connecticut, New York, etc., as well as top public high schools in New York City and Long Island and Westchester and whatever. They were shocked, right? It's like that scene in Casablanca. I'm shocked, shocked. The usual suspects. But that affects your ability to get in, and that's not, at this point, if you're watching this, that's not necessarily what's in your control. Um, what is in your control, not let's focus on that, not the things that are out of your control, are your extracurricular activities showing depth. So there used to be the concept of a well-rounded student. That is no longer the case. Now what colleges want are certainly kids who, might check off a few well-rounded student type things, but it's really more about being pointy, going deep in 2 or 3 areas. And when I say deep, if you're gunning for competitive schools, it's pretty deep. But what they're looking for is not the typical things. Like it's great to be a National Honor Society, but that's literally the top 70% or 75% of your high school. I remember saying that to my other daughter when she was inducted. I said, "Wow, congratulations, you made it to the top 70% of your class." As I was looking around the auditorium and trying to do the arithmetic. And then of course I got an eye roll and, shut up. But that doesn't get you into a top college. You don't get an admissions officer saying, "Get me the National Honor Society kid now." But what does work are what some people refer to as passion project, which I hate that term, but it is accurate. I talked frequently. You may have seen me discuss this particular example of these clients that I had who were twins. They were nerdy, into robotics. We spent easily 4 to 5, 6 months trying to pull out something that would help them stand out because they were great students, but they were very introverted and they didn't really have anything that knocked your socks off or blew you away, extracurricularly speaking. So instead, what we ended up doing was discovering an opportunity for them to head up a robotics program, like an intro to robotics for the middle school students, which they did during the school year. And then that school year ended, and I said, okay, now what happens over the summer? And they're like, I don't know. I said, okay, well, why don't you, do your own program now, not through the school, to continue. So they're like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And that turned out to be a great thing. They got a handful of kids to sign up for them, and they ended up getting some local press, both in print and on local internet television. And we shamelessly packaged that up and sent that off to their Ivy League school where they ended up getting in. And it was and they got a nice note from their admissions officer saying how much their application stood out. It's a very competitive year, yada, yada, yada. Again, I don't know if that's the one thing because I don't believe in the one thing that helps you get in, but there's a difference between being in a robotics club and starting your own initiative to have this type of impact on other people. It wasn't just about the boys, the twins. It was about helping grow an interest, sort of as a farm system, for the high school's robotics, future high school robotics students down at the middle school level. So that is a great example that's why I use it all the time of typical versus atypical. And I hope you understand that. Um, and I'm not knocking being in clubs, that's fine, but whatever you do, if you're a student listening to this, you want to try to have a position of impact. You don't have to found a club, but that is one way to do it. You don't have to be the president and the CEO or the vice president or whatever, but that is a way. The kids that I know who get into top schools have applications that are just jammed with all of that stuff. Leadership, impact. If it's not through the school, it can be on their own, like I mentioned before with the nerds. We had another client this past year who just got off the wait list for her top choice school that she applied early decision for. And she was also pretty quiet, very shy, had some confidence issues, but she was really, really into marine biology. That was actually, I think she's going to major in that against my wishes. And what she ended up doing was assembling a bunch of her photographs, and I think she had maybe written some short, I don't know if they were poems, but some sort of artistic expression um, writings. We took that, and that served as the core basis for a book that I encouraged her and showed her how to self-publish on Amazon. And then she was able to print out copies of the book and send them off to all of the admissions officers at the colleges that she was interested in attending. And she, like I said, she just got in off the wait list for her top choice school. And I actually think she's not going there. I think she's opting for one of her, it might have been choice number two, choice number three colleges that gave her a ton of money because she was very competitive at those schools and she stood out by doing things like this. So she wasn't one of these kids who was joining clubs and being president or an officer, etc., but she went deep in her own thing, which is a form of leadership, and it shows more depth and more, dare I say it, passion. And I think she made the right decision going to a school that's going to cost a lot less because if she continues along the lines of exploring that field, marine biology, then she's not going to make big income when she is older. She'll never get off the mom and dad full ride scholarship. So I think it worked out well for her too. All right. Anything else I need to say here? Um, don't do okay. So don't do stuff in terms of extracurriculars that just quote unquote looks good for college, or don't delegate that if you're a student watching this to mom and she'll take care of everything of creating and conceptualizing and recruiting everyone for that 3-on-3 basketball tournament, which is going to be a fundraiser to help overcome autism, breast cancer, and a disease to be named later. Admissions officers understand when kids are not really involved doing this, when they see right through it. So you don't have to focus only on things that are these, big types of projects that kids can't do themselves. Like, you know, how many kids can form a 501(c)(3) nonprofit? No, they know mom and dad is doing that. So I'm not saying never do something like this, but that's not the only way to show your passion. Oh, continuity and consistency. If you have never lifted a finger to volunteer in ninth grade and did it for 10th grade, and all of a sudden in 11th grade you just spray and pray and you come up with all these, massive amount of activity. That is what I refer to as badge, the born again junior syndrome. Usually where a mom is like, "Hey, Charlie, you haven't done anything for 2 years. You have to have a passion project," right? And forces a kid into doing something. Get off the video games. So, that's not going to be too helpful if you just all of a sudden scattershot things in 11th grade. So if you're in that position and you feel like it's too late, do one thing or maybe one and a half to two things, right? That's what you should be focusing on right now, or just playing the hand you dealt with. Don't, maybe tweak one thing you're doing. You don't have to come up with something entirely new. But if you're the parent or an actual student in ninth or 10th grades, then you should be thinking this way. What can I do now to create this body of work that's going to be judged when I apply to school, which should be the summer before 12th grade? Because that's the thing. You're summing up everything that happened from ninth grade forward. So that's another pet peeve I have if you're a younger family here. A pet peeve I have out of many with having that college meeting with your 11th grade teacher. I mean, in 11th grade with your guidance counselor, that is frequently too late, particularly if you've already set your academic schedule and you've failed to avail yourself of opportunities either in school or outside of school, such as these extracurriculars that I'm talking about right now, that could really have an impact on that 40%, on that body of work that's going to be judged. Sometimes people ask me, should I continue on with chorus? I hate it. I hate singing. Or should I continue on with soccer? And it's usually framed as the student saying, "I want to stop doing this, but my mom wants me to continue doing it because it doesn't look good to drop an activity." And my response is, there's no problem dropping something as long as you replace it with something of equal or greater value. But if you're just dropping it to go goof around and have a free period, no, I don't recommend that. All right, a couple of notes on letters of recommendation. So, if you have an 11th grader, you might have already received the packet from high school with a bunch of different colored pieces of paper asking you to fill out this and that, the brag sheet, something like that. What they're trying to do here is number one, get you to write the letter of recommendation for them, for your student. Okay. But that's an opportunity. Two, they're trying to communicate. They may not be aware of this, but um, guidance counselors are being used by admissions officers to try to communicate something they probably don't know, which is the character of your child. Very few guidance counselors know kids that they are responsible for well enough. So if you have a different experience, that's great, but just understand you're an anomaly. You're the unicorn. Most high school guidance counselors hardly ever meet with their students. But what admissions officers are looking for, the way I describe it, is a thread of continuity that runs through the application, not just the transcripts and the activities, but also the letters of recommendation and really everything there that communicates the value of what that student could potentially bring to that campus community. So character is very important. It's very easy and understandable to fill out a college application and just brag. It's a narcissistic activity. It's almost like you're trying to sell yourself, right, on paper. But there needs to be also a bigger picture. So it's not just I check this box, this one, check, check, check. But it's also I did these things to help veterans or to help other kids who had struggled with reading or ADHD or whatever. If you can tie in a bigger picture, so it's not just about you, but it's about something bigger, that shows character. Frequently, admissions officers have forms for guidance counselors to fill out that indirectly and sometimes directly pull this stuff out. So they want to know, and this is an opportunity for you to explain this in the brag sheet of they want to know about certain behaviors. Like if your child is in class, does he or she participate? Are they patient with others when others are speaking? Are they respectful? Do they help others with homework or with in group activities? Do they take charge or they sit back passively? These are all things that have bearing on the admissions decision. It's primarily at the smaller schools, but I've seen it matter at the bigger schools as well. So these are important things to be thinking about. It's not just grade scores, SATs, but it's also character. And if you look at that brag sheet, keep that in the back of your mind as you're completing it, because you want to highlight certain things that will transmit that signal that this child would be a valuable addition to the campus community. They're not just all about themselves. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, I have 3 more segments to do. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more segment, and then I'm going to break this up into a second video so that it's easy to consume it. Okay, because I have a limited attention span also. Okay, now I'm talking about how to beat the rigged system. Warning: non-politically correct content ahead. What you need to know about how college admissions works is that colleges have their own agendas that may sometimes overlap your child's agenda. But specifically, they're not just looking for the best students. This is not a meritocracy, right? And no one, some people claim that it is, but it's really not. Anyone with half a brain knows it's not a meritocracy. Kids get in for all sorts of reasons. So one specific example that I can give you is that at any given college, competitive college admissions class, they reserve anywhere from 50% to two-thirds of those spots of incoming freshmen for non-academic considerations. Harvard calls them tags. I think Princeton and other elite schools might use the term select as well. This all came out in the 2024 decision, Supreme Court decision. I might be off by a year. That was brought by an Asian American student with perfect SAT scores and top grades who didn't get into Harvard. I think UNC as well, Chapel Hill, because they're two separate cases. But those cases serve to let the Supreme Court rule that the use of affirmative action in college admissions was no longer permissible and that violated the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause. Um, and what was brought out was these diversity goals that colleges had, which lead to them reserving two-thirds of the spots, up to two-thirds of the spots, for special categories, such as underrepresented minorities, which was the basis for this lawsuit. Recruited athletes get a huge, thumb on the scale. That was also um, covered in very much depth in the Harvard case. International students, um, students, children, excuse me, children of faculty also get a thumb on the scale in terms of getting admitted. Development cases. Wonder if you know what that is. The development case is a potential donor to the school's endowment. Okay, let me just say something on this because this is very topical. So yesterday I was playing in a golf tournament, not competitively. I was sponsoring a hole at a golf tournament that a client of mine, a great client of mine, has run for 5 years, and he is a very successful guy financially. He's also a big donor to several different colleges. And I was hanging out with his daughter, who just finished her freshman year in college, University of Michigan, and um, I remembered that and he just made a big pledge to the University of Michigan. But I remembered when he and I were talking about some of the other schools she was looking at. I think University of Virginia might have been her leading contender over University of Michigan. I said, you have this history of being very charitable. Why don't you contact the the head of development. They're not hard to find. I found him with like a 3 second Google search, and just see if he'd be interested in learning and telling you about their program. So he did that. Excuse me. And the response he got back, which surprised me, was I'd be from the guy at University of Virginia. I'd be very happy to talk to you about this after we get through the admission cycle. Meaning, back off. This is not going to help your daughter get in. And I think a lot of that, I think that's the rule now, not the exception, based on all the stuff that happened with these scandals with Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman and all that. The other thing I'll say about donations is that 50 cents on the dollar goes to need-based financial aid for families who really need it. So it's a good thing overall in terms of this system, this agenda that colleges have. So my point here, before I close out is this module, is that if you're not one of those special categories, then you need to be at the higher end of the median, because those special categories, underrepresented minorities, recruited athletes, etc., tend to drive down those categories, those statistics. So if you're not one of those special people, special tags or selects, and you're looking at the statistics, don't get complacent and think I'm right in the middle, I have a shot. You really need to be higher than the median. All right. So when we come back in the second module, I'm going to pick up with how to market yourself and demonstrating interest, and more about how this is, not a meritocracy. It's about how you market yourself. So I'm going to close out right now. Then we'll pick up with the second video immediately.